Hello, all. It's time for books 19 and 20, and maybe I'll read 21. Wrap this up in a few days for the Iliad here. If you remember the last chapter, Hector had slain Patroclus, and was donning Achilles' armor, like, ho 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 ho. And Achilles was beside himself with grief as his best friend was killed. And Achilles' mom came to him and said, I'm going to make this right. And she went to Hephaestus and had Hephaestus forge armor. Remember, Hephaestus is the blacksmith for the gods. So he's forming this godly type armor. And now Achilles is going to, probably go off on the Trojans, which is what Zeus wants, right? Because Zeus wanted Achilles to have a reason to come join the battle, and basically we're witnessing the fall of Troy now. So, Book 19. Achilles was still weeping over Patroclus' body when Thetis arrived with her shimmering load. "My son," she said, "stop crying. Here are the weapons you have asked for. Hephaestus has forged them for you. Put them on and let your destiny take its course." At the sight of the weapons, the Myrmidons around Achilles whispered in utter wonder. So great was the impression of might given by the armor, helmet, and shield. Achilles carefully surveyed the gifts from his mother and Hephaestus and said, "Before I wear these to battle, it is necessary that I reconcile myself with Agamemnon. I am already paying too bitterly for the anger caused by the offense. I pray you, divine mother, save Patroclus' body from decay." "I will, my child, but do not linger. Do your duty." Achilles went to the seafront and with a thunderous voice called for the Greek troops to assemble. Hearing his voice and his words, the Greeks trembled with anticipation and hurried on to the center of the camp. There, in front of all the princes, many of whom were wounded, Achilles walked towards Agamemnon with outstretched arms in a sign of peace and solemnly declared that he renounced any thought of anger and revenge. "I can see," he said, "that our feud has only proved beneficial to Hector. But let us now forget the past. Let bygones be bygones, Agamemnon. We must only think of fighting. Come, lead your army to battle. I shall be at your side." Moved, Agamemnon replied, "Greeks, friends, I should like to say that when I offended the noble Achilles, I was not myself. I know I was wrong, but, believe me, it was not I who spoke. It was not I who offended. It was as though a demon had taken possession of me. No, Achilles, I am not responsible for the outrage I have caused you. What has been, and you are right, but I want to make amends even for a wrong that was not of my doing. You shall receive from me all the gifts you want, and with them you shall receive my friendship." "The gifts can wait," exclaimed Achilles. "Let us turn our thoughts to battle. Let us go now." Odysseus, who had been wounded during the fight, rose to speak. "No, Achilles, we cannot go to battle now. You come with us, and victory shall not escape us. But, my friend, we are still too worn by the tough struggle we have just sustained. Only a few of us and our warriors have had a chance to eat, and you, mighty Achilles, are well aware that strength depends on nourishment. Let us first take some food, then we shall resume our fight with renewed energy." Achilles listened impatiently to these wise and prudent words. He wanted to avenge Patroclus at once, but everyone agreed with Odysseus. Before he prepared for battle, Agamemnon sent Achilles the most precious gift: 7 tripods, 12 mettlesome horses, 20 splendid copper vases, 10 gold talents, and 7 young slaves, all talented at domestic work. Then solemnly and according to Greek tradition, they carried out the sacrifices for the consecration of peace and reconciliation. Finally, the young and beautiful Briseis, who had been the cause of the fatal anger, was taken back to Achilles' tent. When the young girl saw Patroclus' corpse, she knelt by it and began to wail, scratching her cheeks in despair. "Alas, my dearest Patroclus," she moaned, "I shall never be able to speak to you again. We shall never again make plans for the future. I have found you, but never as I thought I would. Dead, you are dead." They all wept, and Achilles looked on somberly, and he remembered the time when they had spoken of war together. "Patroclus, I shall die under the walls of Troy," Achilles would often say. "Such is my destiny, a brief but glorious life. But you, Patroclus, you will go back to Greece, and you will relate my exploits." Odysseus and the other princes urged Achilles to take food. Weakness could overcome him in battle and betray him, but the youth stubbornly refused to eat or drink. From the peaks of Olympus, Zeus then turned to Athena. "Just like a child, Achilles does not want to eat. Still he must not be left to starve. Run, my daughter, and distill into his breast some nectar and ambrosia, divine food, so that he will not be robbed of his strength in the middle of the battle." Zeus interfering again. Athena promptly obeyed, and suddenly Achilles felt his usual strength return to him. He stood up, wiping away the last tears. There was no time to weep, but to fight. The Greek warriors sitting between the ships and the wall so bitterly fought over earlier had now eaten and prepared for battle. Achilles gave orders for the Myrmidons to be ready to move on, and then he started to dress. With eyes blazing like fire and gnashing teeth, he slipped on the armor forged by Hephaestus, fastened his sword belt, secured the shield on his arm, and, finally, placed on his head the helmet adorned with the shimmering horsetail. He then entered his tent and took from a case a formidable spear, so long and heavy that he was the only one among the Greeks who was able to handle it. When he reappeared, he was greeted by roaring cheers from the whole army. Automedon then drew up in the battle chariot to which Xanthus and Balius were harnessed, both pawing the ground impatiently. Achilles leapt onto the carriage and with a deep voice said, "Xanthus, Balius, when the fighting is done, bring me back alive. Do not leave me there dying on the field as you left Patroclus." Through a miracle performed by Hera, Xanthus answered, "Yes, Achilles, we shall save you, but remember the hour of your death is drawing near, and on that hour we can be of no help, even if we run like the wind. It is your destiny, Achilles, to be defeated in battle by a man and God." Stamping his foot impatiently, the hero replied, "Xanthus, why do you speak of death? I know that I must die here, far from home, but before this happens, I will have avenged Patroclus and defeated the Trojans. Let's go now." With that, he gave the cry of war and ordered his charioteers to set off. So, leading the Greeks forward, the city of Troy appeared in the distance, tightly enclosed within its walls. Book 20. The battle between Greeks and Trojans was about to start again, and up above on the peaks of Olympus, Zeus called all the gods to a solemn assembly. He insisted that all be present. With great sternness he said, "This is a decisive time in the war. I shall not move from here, but you may intervene in the battle according to each of your likes and dislikes." At these words the gods immediately flew down the plain which stretched between the city and the sea. Athena, Poseidon, Hephaestus, and Hera sided with the Greeks. Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and Artemis with the Trojans. As soon as the immortals touched down on the battlefield, the fight began furiously. Flying into a temper amongst the clashing troops, Achilles on his chariot searched for Hector in order to challenge him. Ares noticed it and came up to Aeneas. "Aeneas, Achilles is approaching. Go to him, stop him. You will reap eternal glory, and you will save Troy." Aeneas knew he was not as strong as Achilles. He had already fought him once, yet he did not hesitate. He stepped forward, and upon seeing him, Achilles shouted, "Why do you come to me, Aeneas? Do you think you can defeat me and so be rewarded by Priam with the crown of Troy? No, listen to me. Go back now, unless you want to die." "Your chatter will not make me run, Achilles," replied Aeneas, and he launched his spear with all its speed and power, which for all its speed and power was not able to pierce Achilles' shield, the work of a god. The young Greek, in his turn, sent his spear whistling through the air, and it pierced Aeneas' shield like a bolt of lightning. The bronze-headed spear missed Aeneas by a hair's breadth, and sank into the ground beside him. Achilles unsheathed his sword. Aeneas picked up a rock, and brandishing over it at his head, was about to throw it. The duel would certainly have ended with the death of one or the other if Poseidon had not intervened. "No," he whispered, "I do not want Aeneas to die. A great destiny is reserved for him, that of perpetuating the Trojan race through the centuries." And he flew ahead and sprayed a dense mist around Achilles, whose vision became blurred. Poseidon then pulled the spear from the ground, laid it at Achilles' feet, and swept Aeneas off, propelling him to the very back of the Trojan ranks. "Do not fight with Achilles again," he warned, "but know that when he is dead and gone, no other Greek shall ever defeat you." Having spoken these words, Poseidon returned to where Achilles was and lifted the mist. The hero saw his spear lying at his feet, but no Aeneas. Which is interesting because Poseidon is on Achilles' side. "This is indeed a miracle," he muttered. "Anyhow, I knew that Aeneas is loved by the gods. Well, never mind," he exclaimed, and picking up his spear, he called to his men, "There are other Trojans! Friends, follow me! I cannot deal with them alone and fight for you all! Let each of you confront his opponent!" For his part, Hector was encouraging the Trojans, who at the sight of Achilles were already faltering. "You must not be afraid of this man," he shouted. "They have taken Troy with words, but they never will in reality. Were he made of fire, I would still challenge Achilles." His men answered him with a cry of war and the din of the battle. Achilles was achieving wonders. One after another, Trojans fell. When the very young Polydorus, Hector's brother, fell, Hector was overcome with grief and sought instant revenge. Making his way among the fighters, he sought to challenge his rival in a duel. Achilles shouted, "Come, Hector, come and meet your end." "Don't try to frighten me," replied Hector, and he cast his lance. He would not have missed had not Athena, as quick as lightning, warded it off, saving Achilles in the nick of time. Achilles then prepared to strike, but it was Apollo's turn to intervene. He hid Hector in a dense cloud, where Achilles threw his spear 4 times in vain. "Ah, so you escaped me, you cur!" he exclaimed. "A god has saved you again, but I'll have done with you. Do you hear me, Hector? Sooner or later I'll have done with you." He returned to his chariot, and whipping the horses, Automedon the charioteer plunged into the thick of the battle. Like a fire blown by a gale destroying dry forest, So Achilles swept the enemy ranks, mowed down Trojans who stood in his way, and trampled the wounded men in uncontrollable fury. The chariot's wheels, the axle, and the hooves of Xanthus and Balus were about ready to fall off. Book 21 is next. I think I'm going to go ahead and read that. Fairly short. The Trojans withdrew in panic. The disorder turned into irreparable chaos when they reached the Scamander River. Terrified, they fell into the water, seeking salvation on the opposite bank, hoping that Achilles' chariot would not be able to cope with the current. But Achilles leapt from the chariot, and taking only his sword, he chased after the fugitives across the water. Nobody dared to stand up against him. Nobody dared to turn around and face him. Finding no resistance, the hero attacked without mercy. He didn't even spare those who begged. Soon the river became tinged with the dark color of blood. Soon horrendous islands of corpses surged to the surface. Helmets, shields, armors cluttered the banks, and amongst the dead floated the spears. In the water, the implacable Achilles continued to strike. At the sight of so much blood and such ferocity, the god who lived in the depths of the Scamander River swelled its waters and crashed them against Achilles. The waves lashed and choked him, blinding him, overwhelming him in an attempt to knock him down and crush him against the sand and mud. Weighed down by his armor, Achilles struggled desperately and realized that he had reached the limits of his strength. Is it then to be so, he moaned. Am I to drown like an imbecile? Indeed, that would have been his end had not Hephaestus rushed to save him by assaulting the river with his flames and compelling it, after a hard struggle, to calm its water and cease harassing the hero. The fight between the Scamander River and the lame god triggered off a brief but heated feud between all of the gods. From the start of the Trojan War they had been divided. More than once they had disagreed, and Zeus had come to threaten them so that they would not come to blows with each other, but now the time seemed to have come. Ares threw himself into the battle where Athena was already fighting furiously against the Trojans. "Why are you here? Once you guided Diomedes' spear to wound me. Well, now it's my turn." And with this he struck a formidable blow on his sister's helmet. But the helmet could even withstand Zeus's thunderbolt, and Ares' blow came to nothing. The goddess retorted at once by hurling a boulder which reached its target. Ares was hit in the neck. He groped blindly, trying to keep his balance, but his breath had been taken away, and he stumbled onto his knees. "You silly fool," said Athena mockingly. "You want to fight with me, and you don't even know I am stronger than you." The lovely Aphrodite then rushed to Ares' help. She took him by the hand and helped him to his feet and led him away from the field. The outraged Athena chased after her and knocked her down. "Ha!" she exclaimed before her battered rivals. "If we immortals had fought, the war would have been over long ago, and Troy would no longer be standing." Meanwhile, Poseidon had challenged Apollo, but the latter had replied that he did not wish to fight. The haughty Artemis reproached him harshly, urging him to take up the challenge, but Hera flew to confront her. She plucked the bow off of Artemis's shoulder and beat her until she took refuge by Zeus's feet in tears. It was to there, around their father, that all the gods finally returned when they had done with fighting. Some in triumph, some humbled, some vexed, but all the immortals maintained that the Greeks had shown more courage and determination. Among the gods back at Olympus, Apollo was still missing. He had gone back to Troy, determined to defend it with his presence. Inside the city, old Priam climbed up the tower and watched the battle anxiously. When he saw his warriors withdraw in disorder, chased and slaughtered by Achilles, he ordered, "Open the gates! Let our men find shelter in the city, but be careful to shut them in time. Beware, do not let Achilles in." His command was obeyed, but how would the fleeing Trojans enter the city? They were by now trampling over each other. They would be crushed into the rush into the threshold. They would perhaps be slaughtered to the last. Apollo was well aware of it, and so left Troy to try and avoid the catastrophe. He flew to Agenor, the valiant warrior, and inspired him with courage, calm, and determination. Agenor, who was running with the others, stopped at once. "Why am I running?" he thought. "Why do I let myself be driven by the others? I am not afraid of Achilles. He is a man like the rest of us, and like the rest of us, he can be killed. I shall not run, but instead I shall face him." He turned around, wielding his spear. "Achilles!" he shouted. "Do not think you are going to sack Troy today. We are not all frightened of you." And he launched his spear, which struck Achilles under the knee, and had it not hit the leggings made by Hephaestus, it would certainly have broken Achilles' leg. In his turn, the unscathed Achilles prepared to attack. But Apollo intervened and surrounded Agenor with a mist, swept him off to safe ground. So that the Trojans could pass through the open gates, the god took one on Agenor's appearance and appeared in front of the confused Achilles. "So you are still here!" the hero exclaimed, and brandishing his blood-stained spear, he threw himself in hot pursuit of the man he thought was Agenor, and who was running desperately across the plain. "I'll catch up, coward!" shouted Achilles at his heels. And overcome as he was with rage and craze for revenge, he could not have imagined that the fugitive was not Agenor, but Apollo in disguise. Neither did he realize that he was being led in the opposite direction of Troy. So the exhausted Trojans, no longer hounded by Achilles, were able to enter the city, close the gates, and allow themselves at last a little rest. All right. Well, we'll finish the last few books of that up tomorrow, guys. It's getting to the end of the Iliad. And then we might start the Odyssey, see how far we get before the end of the school year.